All right, so we are in our last lesson today, lesson 3 in the Statistics and Society unit. We're looking at representing our data today and how how data could be misrepresented and how we can analyze it. Okay, so it's particularly with graphs. So when you do your own survey and you display your graph, you want to choose a graph that is not misrepresenting your data. So there's many ways we can distort our results, and if we're not careful, you can be persuaded just by the way you make your graph to see the results differently. Let's look at this first example. Before you read any of the words that are written there, I want you to look at these two graphs for a moment. First question is, are they showing the same data? So the title of both is Cost of Gas Over Time in Vancouver, BC. Okay. And then on the vertical axis, we have price per liter, and then we have year. And yeah, it does look like actually they are showing the same data. But even though they're showing the same data, one graph they look quite different. So this first graph starts at 0 and goes up by 50% or 50 cents. Okay, and the second graph starts at 0 but goes up by 25 cents and uses more of the graph here. So when you squish your graph into a small region, the amount looks like the change looks less drastic than if you scale your graph appropriately. So they show the same data. So it says, what is the same about the graphs and what is different? So the graphs display the same data, but the y-axis scale is different. And what type of people might prefer to use each graph? So if we look at the graph on the left, if you were trying to convince people, hey, like the prices have not increased by that much, you might choose this graph, because the difference doesn't look that drastic when you scale it that way. But when you use a smaller scale and you use up more of the graph, the change looks more drastic. So if you were trying to complain that gas prices have increased too much, then you would want to use the one on the right. So just the way that you scale your graph can have a big impact on how the data looks. Okay, really important. This is a way that you can really mislead your observers when you're displaying data, is by making a break in your y-axis. Okay, so when you're making a y-axis, you should always start at 0. But sometimes it's tempting to, let's say your data is like in this example, it's looking at the percent of full-time Canadian students with a job. And all of the percentages are in the 40 to 50% range. So it might be tempting to skip to 40% and then go up by 1 or 2, rather than going up by tens like the graph on the right. But look at the two graphs there. They're showing the same data. Okay, but the one on the left, the change looks so drastic, whereas the one on the right is more representative of what's actually going on, and it's looking like the percentage is not changing very much at all. Canadian students are pretty much working at around a 40 to 45% rate, and it's not really changing. So the one on the right is a much more accurate representation of the data. If you want to exaggerate an increase or a decrease, then you would want to make a break in the y-axis. But it's not good to have a misleading graph. Okay, and then last example here is with a bar graph. So the bar graph is looking at the percentage of First Nations children who take part in traditional singing, drumming, or dancing groups outside of school hours. Okay, the bar graph is misleading because it's hard to compare these bars when they're all different widths. When you make a bar graph, you need to make them the same width. There's also no title, and there's no label here. It's important to include titles and labels so people can understand your graph properly. Okay. Also, if you're including a percentage, you want to include how many children were surveyed and how was that done. And then for part C, it says, what other type of graph could have been used here? A circle graph is really good if you're looking at proportions or percentages of the population. Okay, so just the two main ways, or the two main types of graphs we looked at here are line graphs and then bar graphs. If you're doing a line graph, make sure you start at 0 and you don't have a break in your y-axis. Otherwise, your data is going to look really misleading. And then if you're doing a bar graph, make sure you have titles, labels, you have all the bars being the same width so they're easy to compare.